Every parent wants their child to succeed, but what if the biggest obstacle to that success is something they never realized? The truth is, many kids grow up completely unprepared for real life. Not because they weren't loved, but because they were never taught the skills they actually need. From managing money to handling failure, these lessons often come too late. And by the time a child reaches adulthood, bad habits are already set. Most parents focus on school performance, discipline, and good manners. But how many actively teach their kids how to cook a meal, manage their emotions, or make independent decisions? Many children enter adulthood without knowing how to budget, change a tire, do laundry, or even schedule a doctor's appointment. These tasks might seem small, but together they determine whether a child will thrive or struggle later in life. One of the biggest mistakes parents make is doing everything for their child in an effort to make life easier. It starts with packing their school bag, reminding them of homework deadlines, or cleaning up their messes. Over time, this turns into a pattern where children rely on their parents for everything. By the time they're teenagers, they may lack basic problem-solving skills and expect someone else to handle their responsibilities. So, what's the solution? Start early. Let kids help with household chores. Teach them how to make a grocery list, cook simple meals, and take responsibility for their own schedules. Give them small amounts of money and show them how to save or spend wisely. Let them experience failure in a controlled environment so they can learn how to recover. Because when kids don't learn these lessons young, the real world will teach them in much harsher ways. But life skills aren't the only thing parents overlook. Many also fail to recognize when their child is struggling mentally until it's too late. Mental health is one of the most overlooked aspects of parenting. While most parents pay close attention to their child's physical health, many miss the subtle signs of emotional distress. Anxiety, depression, and stress don't always appear as dramatic breakdowns. Sometimes they show up as minor changes in behavior, less talking, spending more time alone, or a sudden lack of interest in hobbies. One of the biggest mistakes parents make is assuming mental health issues only happen in extreme cases. The reality is, many children struggle in silence. Young kids don't always have the words to express their emotions, so they show their distress in other ways. Stomach aches, headaches, sleep problems, or sudden changes in appetite. Teens, on the other hand, may turn to social media, excessive gaming, or withdrawal from family as a way to cope. Many parents also unintentionally invalidate their child's feelings. Phrases like, "you have nothing to be stressed about," or "you'll get over it," can make kids feel like their emotions aren't important. This pushes them to hide their struggles rather than seek help. So, what should parents do instead? First, create an environment where feelings are openly discussed. Teach children that emotions, both good and bad, are normal. Ask specific questions like, "what was the hardest part of your day?" rather than just, "how was school?" Encourage problem solving rather than just offering solutions. And most importantly, recognize that mental health is just as important as physical health. Because when emotional struggles go unnoticed, they don't disappear. They grow into lifelong challenges that could have been prevented. And sometimes these struggles are made worse by another common mistake: being too overprotective. Every parent wants to keep their child safe, but when does protection turn into control? Many parents don't realize that by shielding their child from every hardship, they're actually making life harder for them in the long run. Overprotected children often grow up afraid to take risks. They hesitate to try new things because they've never learned how to handle failure. Studies show that children who are constantly rescued from challenges struggle more with anxiety and self-doubt. They also tend to be less adaptable when they face real-world problems. Think about this. A child who has never been allowed to climb a tree or ride a bike might grow up physically safe. But what about emotionally? If they never experience small failures, how will they handle big ones, like failing a test, losing a job, or facing rejection? If they never learn to solve their own problems, they'll always rely on someone else to fix things for them. The solution isn't to let kids struggle without support. It's to allow them to face challenges while teaching them how to handle setbacks. Instead of fixing every problem, guide them through it. If they forget their homework, let them deal with the consequences rather than rushing to school to bring it to them. If they struggle with a difficult task, encourage them to keep trying instead of immediately stepping in, because one day they'll have to face the world on their own. And if they've never been given the chance to build resilience, they won't know how to survive. And this brings us to another critical mistake: how discipline is handled. Discipline is one of the most debated topics in parenting. Some believe in tough love, while others take a more relaxed approach. But what happens when a child is raised in a household that is too strict or too lenient? The answer: confusion, rebellion, or a complete lack of responsibility. Strict parents often believe that rigid rules and punishments will teach discipline. However, studies show that overly strict parenting often leads to sneaky, rebellious children. When rules are too rigid, kids don't learn self-control. They learn how to avoid getting caught. This creates a dangerous cycle where children follow the rules out of fear rather than understanding. On the other hand, parents who are too lenient create an entirely different problem. Without structure, children grow up with little sense of responsibility. They struggle with boundaries, self-discipline, and accountability. They may also develop entitlement, believing that rules don't apply to them. The best approach is a balance between the two. Kids need rules, but they also need explanations. They need discipline, but they also need guidance. When parents enforce boundaries while also teaching decision-making skills, children grow up with respect, not fear. And while discipline is important, there's one modern parenting challenge that's even harder to manage: technology. Screens are everywhere. From smartphones and tablets to computers and TV, children today are growing up in a digital world. But while technology can be a powerful tool, too much of it can have dangerous consequences. Many parents assume that as long as their child is entertained, everything is fine. But excessive screen time can lead to attention problems, sleep disorders, and even social anxiety. Studies show that children who spend too much time on devices struggle more with real-world interactions. They become easily distracted, impatient, and even emotionally detached. The problem isn't technology itself, it's the lack of boundaries around it. Many children have unrestricted access to devices, leading to addiction, exposure to harmful content, and even developmental delays. Parents often assume their child is just watching harmless videos or playing a simple game, but in reality, they could be absorbing content that shapes their behavior in ways they don't even realize. The solution is to set clear limits. Screen time should be controlled, and parents should be actively involved in what their children are consuming. Encourage real-world activities, outdoor play, and social interactions, because without boundaries, technology stops being a tool and starts being a problem. And speaking of emotional needs, there's another mistake parents unknowingly make every single day, one that affects their child's self-esteem for life. Many parents assume that being around their child physically is enough. They take them to school, make sure they eat, and provide everything they need. But being physically present isn't the same as being emotionally available. In today's fast-paced world, many parents unknowingly neglect quality time with their children, assuming that providing for them is enough. But what happens when a child doesn't get real, focused attention from their parents? Studies show that children who grow up feeling emotionally neglected often struggle with self-worth, relationships, and communication later in life. They may develop behavioral issues, act out for attention, or become withdrawn and emotionally distant. One of the most dangerous parenting traps is believing that quantity equals quality. Spending hours in the same room doesn't matter if there's no meaningful interaction. A parent scrolling on their phone while their child plays nearby isn't the same as engaging in a conversation, playing a game together, or simply listening. Quality time isn't about grand gestures or expensive trips. It's about connection. A simple daily routine of talking during dinner, reading together before bed, or going on short walks can make a world of difference. Asking about their thoughts, fears, and experiences, even if they seem small, builds trust and emotional security. And while emotional neglect is damaging, there's another mistake that can be just as harmful: failing to meet a child's deeper emotional needs. Every child has emotional needs, but unlike hunger or exhaustion, they don't always express them directly. Instead of saying, "I feel unloved" or "I need support," children may act out, become aggressive, or withdraw into silence. Unfortunately, many parents misinterpret these behaviors as bad attitudes rather than cries for help. One of the biggest mistakes parents make is assuming that children will just be fine as long as they have food, clothing, and a place to sleep. but emotional neglect can be just as harmful as physical neglect. Studies show that children who don't feel emotionally supported often struggle with self-esteem, anxiety, and even physical health issues later in life. Children need to feel heard, valued, and understood. They need to know that their feelings matter, even if those feelings seem irrational or exaggerated. Dismissing a child's emotions, telling them to stop crying, get over it, or be tough, can teach them to suppress their feelings rather than process them in a healthy way. A child who grows up feeling unheard or emotionally neglected may struggle with relationships, become emotionally distant, or develop an inability to express themselves in adulthood. The solution? Active listening. Instead of brushing off a child's concerns, acknowledge them. Instead of fixing every problem for them, guide them in understanding their own emotions. Because emotional intelligence is just as important as academic intelligence. And speaking of things that shape a child's emotional development, there's one habit many parents have that can be incredibly damaging, whether they realize it or not. Do as I say, not as I do, is one of the biggest myths in parenting. Children learn far more from watching their parents than from listening to them. No matter how many times a parent tells a child to be respectful, work hard, or control their emotions, those lessons will be meaningless if they don't see the same behavior in action. A child who sees their parents yelling will believe that yelling is how problems are solved. A child who watches their parents lie, even about small things, will assume dishonesty is acceptable. And a child who sees their parents constantly on their phone will learn that screens are more important than personal interaction. The biggest mistake many parents make is expecting their children to follow rules they don't follow themselves. Kids are incredibly observant, and they mimic behaviors far more than they obey instructions. A parent who demands respect, but doesn't show respect, will raise a child who either resents authority or disrespects others. A parent who preaches honesty, but lies to get out of commitments, will raise a child who bends the truth without guilt. The best way to raise responsible, respectful, and emotionally intelligent children is to model those traits consistently. Show kindness, and they'll learn kindness. Handle stress in a healthy way, and they'll learn resilience. Treat others with respect, and they'll understand the importance of it. Children are mirrors, and what they reflect depends on what they see. But while setting a good example is crucial, there's another parenting mistake that can deeply damage a child's confidence, and many parents do it without even realizing. Every parent wants their child to succeed, but in an effort to push them towards success, many parents make a devastating mistake, comparing them to others. Whether it's a sibling, a classmate, or even a friend's child, these comparisons can seriously damage a child's self-esteem and emotional well-being. You should be more like your brother. Why can't you get grades like Sarah? When I was your age, I worked much harder. These statements may seem harmless or even motivational, but they often have the opposite effect. Instead of inspiring a child to do better, they create feelings of inadequacy, resentment, and self-doubt. Children who are constantly compared to others may feel like they'll never be good enough, leading to anxiety, depression, and a lack of confidence. Comparisons also foster unhealthy sibling rivalries and discourage individuality. Every child has unique strengths and weaknesses, and forcing them into competition with others can make them feel like their own talents and achievements don't matter. Instead of comparing, parents should encourage personal growth by focusing on a child's individual progress. Recognizing and celebrating small improvements, rather than focusing on how they measure up to others, builds confidence and self-worth. When children feel valued for who they are, rather than how they compare, they develop a much healthier mindset towards success. And while comparisons can damage self-esteem, there's one parenting mistake that can be even more harmful in the long run: how discipline is handled. Discipline is necessary, but the way it's handled can have lifelong consequences. Many parents believe that harsh punishments, yelling, spanking, or extreme restrictions are the best way to correct bad behavior. But studies show that these methods often do more harm than good. Harsh discipline doesn't teach self-control. It teaches fear. A child who is constantly yelled at may learn to obey, but not because they understand why their behavior is wrong. Instead, they learn to avoid punishment by lying, hiding mistakes, or developing secretive behavior. Physical punishment, such as spanking, has been linked to increased aggression, emotional instability, and lower self-esteem in children. It teaches them that violence is an acceptable way to handle conflicts, and many children who experience it grow up either fearing authority or resenting it. So what's the right way to discipline? Effective discipline isn't about punishment, it's about teaching. Instead of yelling, explain consequences clearly. Instead of hitting, use logical consequences that relate to the behavior. If a child refuses to do their homework instead of taking away their favorite toy, let them experience the natural consequence of getting a poor grade. If they break a rule, have them take responsibility for fixing the situation. When discipline is focused on guidance rather than control, children learn responsibility, problem solving, and self-regulation, skills that will serve them far better in the long run than fear-based obedience. This completes all 10 major parenting mistakes. Each one, on its own, may seem small, but together, they can shape a child's future in ways many parents don't even realize. By recognizing these mistakes and making small changes, parents can create a healthier, more supportive environment that sets their child up for lifelong success.